and welcome to the DSR Daily. I'm David Rothkopf. I'm joined, as always, by Riley Fessler. How are you, Riley?
I'm through my stages of grief, David. So
Wow, that was fast.
yeah.
You know, the country will suffer for years, but you got over it in a couple of days. So, anyway, well, that's a good thing. Uh, Minna's sick. She out sick.
Yep, that's right, Minna. We wish you well wherever you are.
That's right, Minna. I'm sure if you're homesick, you're listening to this podcast. Well, it's been a full week. It's a Friday. I guess we can lead with the fact that it's a 3-day weekend here in the United States. That's positive, right, Riley?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank God.
Thank God. Exactly. Well, okay. Why don't you kick it off? You can play the part of Riley and the part of Minna.
President-elect Donald Trump has appointed Susie Wiles as White House Chief of Staff, making her the first woman to hold the position. Wiles, a key figure in Trump's 2016, 2020, and 2024 campaigns, is credited with professionalizing his campaign operations and earning the trust of Trump and his team. Known for her political skills and ability to minimize infighting, Wiles will navigate the complexities of Trump's inner circle and oversee White House operations. Despite her limited experience in Washington, Wiles' leadership and loyalty have made her a respected figure within Trump's political sphere.
Well, there are a few things about this. First of all, typically people start with their chief of staff. Often a chief of staff is kind of the deputy president. When you're a guy like Trump and you're really kind of chairman of the board, president, you get involved in the things you want to, but not the others. Chief of staff has a lot of power. But Trump has had problems with having senior level officials and advisors around him. And one of the things that distinguishes Wiles is she's the only campaign manager Trump has ever had who didn't get fired in the middle of the campaign. So she's got some skills, and I think it's an encouraging sign to have people who are professional and if you could impose some kind of discipline on Donald Trump and Donald Trump's campaign, that's a considerable achievement. For trivia fans out there, Wiles' middle or maiden name is Summerall. She is the daughter of Pat Summerall, NFL commentator for many, many years on television. For prior to that, an NFL player, and so she kind of comes out of the world of sports and entertainment that Trump is drawn to.
In his first speech following Vice President Kamala Harris's loss to Donald Trump, President Joe Biden called for unity, stating, "You can't love your country only when you win," and urging Americans to see each other as fellow citizens, not adversaries. He emphasized the integrity of the election, describing it as fair and transparent, and committed to a peaceful transition of power with Trump's team. Biden praised Harris for her inspiring campaign and defended his administration's achievements, including over $1 trillion in infrastructure investments. Closing with a message of perseverance, he urged Americans to stay engaged and maintain faith in the country's future.
Look, it was the right kind of message to deliver after a loss. I think there's a lot of internal questioning of how things got to where they got to for the Democrats. Trump winning the popular vote, Trump winning the electoral vote, Trump winning back the control of the Senate. Looks like they will maintain control of the House. I think a lot of people are looking at the Biden administration, which is clearly an accomplished administration, and asking what would have happened if Biden had decided to pass the torch, a year ago, as he implied that he might in when he was running in 2020, passing the torch. She had had enough time. It seems quite likely that Kamala Harris could have pulled this thing out. She really did a remarkable turnaround in a very short period of time. But there will be a long time to discuss all of this because the next major set of elections aren't for 2 years. I would add one other thing, and that is that There's an interesting piece in the FT which noted that in 10 major economy elections that have taken place in the past year, um, the incumbent party lost in all of them, something that has not happened since the middle of the last century. And you have to ask yourself, well, why is that the case? And I think the conclusion is that COVID epidemic led to global inflation and consequences that lasted for several years, and that apparently each of those incumbent parties in all of those countries, all of which are quite different, paid a price for that. And I think before you jump to conclusions about uh, this race and what the causes of the Democrats' defeat were, we need also to consider exogenous factors, global trends. Riley?
President-elect Donald Trump outlined one of his first priorities as strengthening the U.S. border and carrying out mass deportations, which he called necessary to combat crime and drug cartels. He argued that his electoral victory was a mandate to bring common sense, in his words, to the country, emphasizing his belief in welcoming legal immigrants while enforcing stricter immigration policies. Trump also credited his immigration stance with helping him win support from Latino voters, noting his gains among diverse groups, including young voters and women. Additionally, Trump spoke about positive conversations with Vice President Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden, and he plans to meet with Biden for lunch soon to discuss the transition of power.
Um, I'm not really ready to say, oh, Donald Trump has gotten all presidential, because that was kind of a joke during the last candidacy. But I've heard that his conversations with Biden and Harris were not contentious, that they were fairly sort of normal as these conversations go. The idea of sitting down with Biden is something he wouldn't have done before that he's doing now. And one has to wonder, what is the effect of Trump having a big victory, a big vindication, control of the Senate, control of the House, knowing that he is not going to be facing the legal trials that he has faced? Could he be somewhat more moderate in the way that he behaves? Now, clearly this story begins with him talking about major deportations. That was his big promise. He's going to follow through it to some extent. But the logistical problems of deporting masses of people, identifying those to deport and deporting them, are enormous. The last time the country attempted to do this, they were talking about a couple of 100,000 people back in the Eisenhower era. And it may have been fewer than that actually were deported. This time you're talking about millions and millions. And the question is, who's going to do it? Where are they going to do it? How are they going to find the people? How are they going to get local police to cooperate with them? Already some blue state governors are saying they won't cooperate in these kind of things. What's the consequence? What's the economic consequence? How will markets react to all of this? What are the legal possibilities? What's possible under the law in the United States? My guess is that there will be less deportation. It'll end up being a lot like the wall with Mexico. What will happen will be ugly and uncomfortable for America and is not the way we should behave. But having said that, I don't think it will be what he is talking about in terms of scope, because I don't think that's achievable. And what he will do instead is he will say, hey, crime is down. I've done it. I've gotten the bad ones out. Crime rates are falling. Of course, we will be there to say crime rates have been falling for the past several years, but he has no hesitation in claiming credit for the work of prior administrations. And frankly, if crime rates are falling, that's a good thing for everybody. And if he can take credit for this without doing the whole insane project of deporting 10 or 11 million people, that would be a good thing too.
Looking internationally, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky revealed that North Korean troops have joined Russia's forces in the Kursk region and engaged in combat with Ukrainian forces, resulting in casualties. Zelensky stated that 11,000 North Korean soldiers are stationed there, marking an unprecedented development in the ongoing conflict. This deployment, coupled with intensifying drone attacks on Ukrainian cities, highlights a surge in military aggression from Moscow, which is also bolstered by Iranian made Shahed drones. Meanwhile, US President elect Donald Trump has expressed intentions of resolving the war swiftly, raising speculation over potential pressure on Ukraine to make territorial concessions, a stance Zelensky continues to oppose.
Yeah, I think a key factor here is going to be what is Europe going to do? Are our allies in Europe going to say no? We'll continue to support the Ukrainians, and what is Europe and the United States going to do on the bigger issues that might be involved in negotiations, like does Ukraine have a future in NATO? If the United States says Ukraine doesn't have a future in NATO, it doesn't have a future in NATO. Now that can change as presidents change, but right now, it is something you got to expect. You got to expect that Trump is going to say, nope. Here's the deal: Russia gets to keep the land that it's gotten. Ukraine will have a buffer zone between that and the Russians. They're talking about 800-kilometer buffer zone. Ukraine will not rearm heavily. Ukraine will not be in NATO. Perhaps Ukraine will have a little more progress with its EU talks, but it'll be a smaller Ukraine, and it'll be one that is less of a threat, or perceived as less of a threat. It was never a threat to Russia, and it will be a sad outcome at the end of all of this. I, 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 I don't know what the alternative is if the United States decides to withhold aid from Ukraine going forward, and so that is one of the most direct and likely unfortunate consequences of this election here in the United States. Having said that, the American people knew that was going to be the consequence of this. And so, to some extent, we need to say, this was, this was on the table and people knew it was going to happen. Now, you may argue, well, how many Americans are aware of these things and how much of an issue is foreign policy? And we can have that discussion. But what Trump's likely about to do will not come as a surprise to anybody. Shouldn't anyway. Certainly to you guys who are out there listening to this podcast.
The UN Human Rights Office reported that nearly 70% of verified fatalities in the Gaza war were women and children, indicating a significant violation of international humanitarian law's principles of distinction and proportionality. As of now, the UN has verified 8,119 deaths, though Palestinian health authorities have reported a much higher toll of over 43,000 for the conflict that began 13 months ago. The report highlights that 44% of the verified victims were children, with a significant number aged 5 to 14, suggesting inadequate precautions to prevent civilian harm. The UN calls for accountability through credible judicial mechanisms, while Israel maintains that it strives to minimize civilian casualties and attributes the civilian toll to Hamas's alleged use of civilian infrastructure.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not alleged use. Hamas uses civilian infrastructure and hides behind civilians. And having said that, the Israelis know that, and they still have to take precautions. That's what international law says. You can't just go in and attack and harm innocent civilians. And whereas you're talking about a lower number, and the Palestinian authorities are saying 43,000, there are other people who are saying it's much higher than that because there are a lot of bodies buried in the rubble. What we do know is this: has just been a catastrophe for the people of Gaza, and undoubtedly, international laws were broken, war crimes were committed, and I have to say, it was a catastrophe in terms of U.S. foreign policy as well. And the Biden administration and others, may be saying, well, it didn't have a massive effect. It certainly had some effect on voting in Michigan, but I think it contributed a lot to perceptions of the Biden administration that were not helpful, because there's a lot of dissent in a lot of communities in the United States, rightly, I think, concern about the way of the conduct of this war. And I think that has led now to Trump. Now, to all of those who voted against Kamala Harris because they were angry with U.S. Gaza policy, just you wait. Donald Trump's going to give him complete carte blanche. And if the Israelis, proceed along the path they're on, that could include sort of removing the Palestinian population from key parts of Gaza and replacing it with Israeli settlements, and essentially squeezing Gaza in other ways. Uh, that's what you should expect over the course of the next couple of years. And I think anybody who ever voted for Trump or didn't vote for Harris because of Gaza policy will rue the day, because it's going to get worse, not better.
And that's all I've got.
Well, that's it. Well, it's a Friday and it's a 3-day weekend, so we won't be back with you until Tuesday. But if something happens, obviously, we'll pop on here as we do. We've got a Still a Consciousness coming later today. We did a very good podcast yesterday, sort of a political postmortem with our experts, Simon Rosenberg and Tara McGowan. You really don't want to miss that. It follows on the heel of the broader analysis of the implications of this that we got on Wednesday from David Sanger and Ed Luce and Rosa Brooks. And so if you haven't caught up on all of those, use the weekend as a chance to catch up on them. And we will launch into the new week with vigor and a sense that telling the truth via media like this that can reach audiences in ways that legacy media can't is going to be ever more important. And we are up for the job and look forward to being at your side as we approach this new period in our history. Until then, bye-bye.